Good afternoon. Welcome to the 20th anniversary celebration of the Boston College Center for International Higher Education. My name is Laura Rumbley. I'm the Associate Director of the Center, or CIHE, as many of us frequently call it, and I have the distinct pleasure of opening our proceedings today. We are exceedingly grateful to those of you who could join us physically at Boston College for this event, particularly in light of the extended taxi rides that it involved for some of you. We also send a warm greeting to those of you who may be watching us from elsewhere throughout the world via our live webcast. Warmest greetings to all. We have a relatively short, but we hope lively and interesting program planned for this anniversary celebration. We will reflect a bit on the past, where CIHE came from and how it has evolved. We will also turn our sights energetically to the future. We hope to involve you, our guests, in this conversation as well. And in this age of social media, may I encourage you to think about registering your reactions to today's discussions in the Twitter sphere by using the hashtag you see on the screen, CIHE20. To get us started, I have the very great honor of turning the podium over to Dr. Patricia DeLu, Vice Provost for Faculties here at Boston College, for some opening remarks. Where CIHE came from and how it has evolved. We will also turn our sights energetically to the future. We hope to involve our guests in this conversation as well.
It's a great honor for me to welcome you to this celebration of the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College. A celebration that not only looks back at the center's extraordinary 20 years, but also looks forward to the next decade and beyond. When Professor Philip Altbach came to Boston College and its Lynch School of Education in the fall of 1994, then Dean Diana Poulin thanked him in her letter offering him an appointment for his, quote, willingness to commit to an endeavor to make Boston College an international center for Jesuit higher education, end quote. Phil, thank you for your willingness to commit to such an endeavor. It has worked out quite well. As our program this afternoon indicates, Phil will soon too briefly rehearse some of the accomplishments of the center during his 20-year tenure as director. For Boston College, the CIHE, or Center for International Higher Education, under Professor Altbach's direction, has, almost without parallel at BC, made our reputation internationally. As Phil always says, and I always quote him, a great university is an international university, and thanks to the CIHE, Boston College looks out to the world. The center's many publications, which now include websites, podcasts, Twitter feeds, and a Facebook page, are a resource for the study and the practice of higher education across the globe. But even more, the tireless presence of Phil Altbach across the globe has made the center, and through it, Boston College, an important voice in the advancement of international higher education. The mission statement of the Lynch School of Education, where the CIHE is housed, ends with the statement that the diverse work of its faculty and students is united in, quote, the underlying aspiration to enhance the human condition, to expand the human imagination, and to make the world more just, end quote. The insight of the Center for International Higher Education is that justice demands access to quality higher education for all the world's people. From our president, Father Leahy, and our provost, David Quigley, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. DeLu. In the beginning, back in 1995 that is, there was not yet a Center for International Higher Education, but there was a man with an idea. That man, of course, was Dr. Philip Altbach. For those of us who know Philip well, we are keenly aware of how very full of ideas he constantly is. But I think for many of us, his vision to launch CIHE may have been his greatest inspiration ever. Professor Altbach is here with us today with some reflections to share about how CIHE came into existence, what has shaped its development over the last 2 decades, and what have been some of the key milestones for the center along the way. Please join me in welcoming Professor Philip Altbach to the podium.
Thank you very much. it's a bit humbling to be here with such a distinguished group of colleagues and hearing some unjustified but pleasant remarks from my colleagues. And it's also a little bit impossible to reflect in 5 minutes, which is what I've been given, to reflect on 20 years. I'll try. In 1994, I walked in the door here at BC and had an idea. Interestingly enough, I went to Father J. Donald Monin, the president, and Father Bill Neenan, the provost and dean of faculties, and said, Father Monin, Bill, what about if I started a Center for International Higher Education? And after saying, what the heck is that? They said, sure. Don't ask us for much money, but go and do your thing. And so I did. And BC has been a welcome home all these years. They've let me do what I wanted to do, basically. They've let us start whatever initiatives we wanted, so long as we didn't ask for much money. And I think it's been a reasonable success over that time. Another thing happened at that beginning. This, remember, was almost the pre-internet age, 20 years ago. In fact, our first graduate assistant here, James Forrest, who is now a professor at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, said to me, hey, Phil, what about a website? First thing I said was, what's a website? And the second thing I said, you do it, but don't spend any money. And he did it, and he did it well. And we were one of the, amazingly enough, for those of you who know me and my tremendous abilities on the internet and with technology, he did it very well, and we were one of the first adopters of the internet in our field, or in probably most fields in education and related social sciences. That put us on the map in a very significant way. The other idea that we had here was a publication called International Higher Education, which is now 20 years old because it's been running this whole time. That concept, which I thought of as a way of communication, because one of the main foci of the center over all these years is to create a node of communication for international higher education, for informing, for debate, for discussion, for critique in our field. That publication, with articles of 1,000 words, the magic 1,000 words, short enough for busy people to read, long enough to actually say something. That turned out to be a very good model. And we are now in 5 languages around the world. We have a very good, we have a web presence. We still publish on paper. We did an interesting survey of our readers recently and discovered some people, I hope some of them under the age of 60, still like the paper version. So long as we can afford it, we're still going to do that. Also, early in our history, a newly appointed grants officer at the Ford Foundation, Dr. Jorge Balan, originally from Argentina, found out what we were doing and came knocking on my door and said, what ideas do you have about international higher education? And I said, lots of them, Jorge. And he was willing to fund us for 15 years of support from Ford, which really kept us going, made it possible to publish IHE, sponsored several of our research projects over the years, and was very helpful intellectually as well as financially. Over that time, he probably, I tried to add it up once, invested about $1.5 million in the center. Now, that's over 20 years or 15 years, so it's not that much every year. We have always believed, we've always been pretty small, and we've always, by design, worked with colleagues all around the world. It would take me much too much time to delineate who we've worked with during that period. Recently, however, we have a very strong research partnership with colleagues at the National Research University Higher School of Economics in Moscow, where we are now on our, I think, 5th joint research project. The 4 that we've already finished have been published as books in several different languages, mainly English and Russian, but also several others. And that relationship is strong and has been very helpful for us, because one of our goals over time has also been networking. We've tried very hard to help develop a field called international higher education. I think it's fair to say that prior to us and some others, 20, 30 years ago, there was no such field. There were people who were including me, who were thinking about higher education in a global perspective, but there was no field. And now there is. I wouldn't say it's as important as nuclear physics or anything like that, but it's there. And we've had, I think, a significant role to play in it. As I said, we've always been quite small. I ran into a colleague at NAFSA yesterday who said, I have this vision of the Center for International Higher Education as having a wonderful building with columns in front. I hate to tell you what we actually have. Many of you have seen our modest offices over there next door in Campion Hall. So we certainly don't have a building. Partly we've thought it important to stay small, partly of necessity. For much of our history, in fact, the center was me, 2 or 3 doctoral students, a half-time administrative assistant, who, by the way, has been with us for that whole 20 years, and in the last few years, Dr. Rumbly as associate director. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen, so small. So we've always believed small is beautiful. We've also believed in complaining. We are one of the sources, I like to think, of what we think is constructive criticism of some mainstream tendencies, especially commercialization and related issues in the area of higher education around the world. We frequently get people mad at us. We love it when people are mad at us, because it does get them to think. So we've taken a critical step. It's daunting, but I'm so pleased that the leadership is going to someone who actually was here at our birth 20 years ago as a visiting scholar at BC when he was only about 9 years old. But he was a quick learner. And he has contributed, I would say, as much as me, maybe more, to the development of our field as well. So I'm really delighted to turn the floor over to Hans de Witt. I've tried to give you a sense of the past and a little bit the present, and Hans will talk about the future, again briefly.
Thank you very much, Philip. I think it's actually kind of ironic, your complaint about the length of time you were given, considering those 1,000 words that you hold us to for IHE articles. Short is beautiful, but thank you for your comments very much. As a center like CIHE evolves, so too does its leadership, as Philip has mentioned. And as he steps down from the position of director at the end of this summer and assumes the title of founding director, we welcome Hans de Witt into the role of director. In many ways, as Phil has said, Dr. de Witt already has a long history with the center. Interestingly, 20 years ago, not only was Hans de Witt here as a visiting scholar, but he co-authored an article in the very first issue of IHE, our quarterly newsletter. So something was aligned there in the stars. So Hans is well positioned to join us with an appreciation of our unique past, while also bringing a distinct perspective, a unique set of ideas, and a new agenda for the future. Hans, we'd love to hear more about your plans for our next decade.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Phil. When Phil started to use the word humble, I said, well, that word is much more appropriate for me because it's really feeling humble when you are, and at the same time, proud and honored to be stepping in the footsteps of somebody like Philip, who over the past 20 years has been my mentor, my supervisor, and also friend and dear colleague, and working together. So it's really an honor to be stepping in his footsteps and taking the next phase of the Center for International Higher Education here at Boston College. As Philip was saying, 20 years ago I came here as a visiting lecturer at the sociology department, and I was working at that time at my first, editing the first book for the OECD on internationalization of higher education. Coming here by at that time, director of the international office, Marianne St. Orange, who we had an exchange agreement with. She said, well, if you want to work in a sabbatical on your book, we can promise you this beautiful campus. And as many who have been here coming for the first time today, you see how a wonderful campus this is, and you feel immediately at home. But I was still a little bit isolated in the sociology department because nobody was really working in the field of higher education, of internationalization of higher education, until somebody said, well, there just has become a new professor here at the School of Education, and we think that he might have some interest in international higher education, internationalization. So I set an appointment, and that was indeed the start of 20 years of collaboration. But at that time, I would have not even think of mentioning that I would be standing here 20 years later and becoming the new director of the center. And even 10 years ago, when I came for the second term here as a New Century Fulbright Scholar, and continuing the work that we were doing together, I at that time even would not have imagined that this was going to happen. So I'm very proud, I'm very pleased, and at the same time humble, because I have, and that's always a big challenge, if you have to follow up somebody with the record that Philip Altbach has, everybody will always judge you, well, but he did that and he did that and so much better. So I hope still that with my record that I will be able a little bit to match with what he has accomplished, and the good to work together with a team that has been working already for a long time with Philip in making the center work. So also there I have a strong basis to work on with Salina, the administrative assistant, the graduate assistants, and last but not least, Laura Rumley, who I already know also for several years, and we have been working together. And so that was also a good feeling that I had somebody as my associate director, which I could read and write with and work with. And we already have had many interesting sessions, and Philip was already warning me, well, don't do too much. I mean, don't get too much on your plate. But I'm a little bit like him. I always want to do as much as, because there's so many interesting things in this field of international education. I'm also very pleased because I will be working in the Lynch School with a nice group of colleagues over there who have been very welcoming me. As I said in my application, a little bit different, I think, than for Phil. I have a background which is an administrative background as well, so I have been in senior administrative positions. So I am a little bit more familiar and maybe less critical than Philip about the need that you have an organizational structure and the bureaucracy you have to deal with. And so I hope that in that sense also I can even more strengthen the relationship between the center and the Lynch School, and at the same time the whole Boston College community. I have been really always feeling at home, and that was, I think, my first sentence in my application letter. Why I am doing it, I want to come home to Boston College. I want to come home to this nice community where I always feel happy and pleased to be. So that is about why I'm so happy to come. And it's very interesting, by the way, while everybody is responding to my appointment here in Boston College, they were saying, well, why are you having to make the decision to come to Boston College? You were working in beautiful cities as Amsterdam and Milan. You don't have piles of snow there, etc. My first interview was when the snowstorm started and I had to stay longer in Boston, which I didn't mind, by the way. But I really think that this is really a nice challenge for me, and I'm looking much forward to it. And building on the work that Philip has done, making all sorts of new initiatives. We are intensively discussing what kind of new initiatives can we do. One of the things that we are working on is creating a master on international higher education, where we will really see the possibility to train people both in the US but also internationally on how to operate in the field of international higher education. It's an increasingly more important profession, and everybody who has been this week at NAFSA with 12,000 participants, you see there is an enormous group of people who are working in this field, and there is not really a master that really helps them in their professional development. So we hope that we will be able, with the reputation of the center and Boston College, to create a master and also look at possibilities to make it more innovative by combining courses here with partnerships with other centers around the world, online programs, field experiences internationally with organizations involved in the field. So that was our one of our challenges, in particular on the educational side, to create this master, and hopefully we can be starting that in September 2016. Which already some people say that's a challenge, but we want to move forward on that. And I'm very happy that Lau and I have been having already very good discussions to set up the structure for that master. So that's one important thing. The second thing what we do, and Philip has been setting already the path for that, is we don't want to work in isolation as a center. We want to collaborate with other centers around the world, and in particular in centers in emerging and developing regions of the world. So we want to work with centers of research in higher education in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in Russia, and we want to see how we can, the already established partnership with these centers, but also with centers elsewhere, like my previous center in Milan, where I come from, to see, can we do joint research together? Can we do joint training programs together? Can we write joint publications together? So that's another effort where we really want to see higher education has to be international, then also we have to collaborate together internationally and bringing in also the voices of those who are still developing the higher education community. One of the research projects in that collaboration we are wanted to start about is about making a comparative analysis of doctoral studies in different parts of the world. I mean, there's so much still to do in that area. There's so many different rules and regulations, but also cultures of how doctoral studies is and how it is positioned, that one of the research projects we are thinking about is doing that. Regionally, we built on the global network that already the center has, and the focus that it has very much already on regions like Asia and Africa in developing. We want stronger to be involved with Africa in particular. That's a region which still is in enormous need of building its own sector of higher education, and having a partnership with the colleagues there that are working on developing that higher education sector, and how we can help them, collaborate with them more than even helping them, collaborate with them in doing joint research and doing joint projects together. And the same is with Latin America. My background is from Latin American studies. I have a strong feeling and relationship with that region, and we have in our team, including Laura, but also Liz Rijsberg, Ivan, we have a whole group of people that have connections with Latin America, know Spanish, and we can really build new partnerships there and new projects together with Latin America. So that Africa and Latin America are for us two important regions, but not forgetting the rest of the world at all, because we have been building good contacts in Asia, and of course with my old continent, Europe, we will keep working together as well. That's from the regional perspective. what we also, and maybe that comes from my background, at the fact that my first university where I was working as in international education was Catholic University in Tilburg in the Netherlands. I have been, over the past 5 years, I've been working in the Catholic University of Sacred Heart in Milan, and now I'm going to another Catholic university, which I already have, as you have heard, long relationships with. And what intrigues me is there a relationship between Catholic identity in higher education and internationalization? And if you look at the experiences in general, in many mission statements they say there is a relationship, but in practice there's always a struggle with that. And one of the research projects we have been doing, and we are looking to have a grant to start a first seminar on that in Santiago, Chile, with the Catholic University in Santiago, to do a seminar on that topic of relationship between Catholic identity in higher education and internationalization. And we hope that out of that becomes a more broader research proposal where we do comparative analysis between Latin America and Catholic universities, North America and Europe. And also my university in Milan has been participating in that research project. So that's another example of how we want to do also new things and also link the center even more with its institution, Boston College, by doing also research in that area, following on what has been done in the past. In that, and there will be many more initiatives, we are just talking with several organizations and entities about new projects. We are working on a training program for Russian international education officers in the 5100 project, which come here as a group in November. We're going to do a training on that. We are working with the Christian Union Association in Hong Kong to create a training program. So we also do all kind of training programs together. That will all new developments will happen, because international higher education is a field which is not flat. It's always growing and changing, and it's constantly new developments involved. The whole technology issue that Philip was in a simple way of creating a website talking about, but of course higher education is very much affected by that, and also the implication of that might be another research area which we will touch on in the future. Funding is an issue, and Philip has been referring to that on several times. We have a very gracious but still modest funding if you have seen an ambitious agenda as we have. And we always have been, as a center, grateful to donations like from the Ford Foundation, now from the Carnegie Foundation for projects in Africa together with KwaZulu-Natal and other donors to make the projects going. But we also have a lot of friends, and one of the things that we want to do is develop an endowment for the center where we will build up to have seed money to create new initiatives, either by contracting an extra research graduate assistant, a postdoc position part-time, or other ways. And we are working on an endowment and starting a fundraising campaign for that. We have luckily already a start of something like $40,000 from projects that Philip has been working on, which is the start of the endowment. And if you are interested and willing to collaborate, please contact us. Our target for this year is to come to $100,000, so we are welcome to hear to you. Having that said, I'm very pleased with all you being here and interested in our center, and look forward to collaborating in the future with many of you in making the center even much stronger than the very strong basis that Philip has been establishing over the past years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans, and I look forward to talking with you about the 6 new associate directors that we will hire in order to help us with this agenda that's been laid out. Very exciting. At this point, I'd like to call forward our 2 additional speakers. I think perhaps one of the most defining characteristics of the center, and it's been alluded to already multiple times, is the way in which it has brought together so many different individuals from around the world to collaborate on projects and to contribute their unique expertise and insights. Everyone involved, from experienced scholars to early career academics and researchers to graduate students.
Nice to meet you.
has benefited from this dynamic.
Your water too. This is Eva.
As we all know, CIHE has a long-standing interest in stimulating very current conversation about higher education developments worldwide. And in keeping with this tradition, just a couple of months ago, on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of our newsletter, IHE, we asked some 24 colleagues from around the world to craft short opinion pieces in relation to what they thought will be the most important issues facing higher education globally in the next 20 years. We thought it would be very appropriate to pick up on that theme here and to invite two very esteemed colleagues to weigh in on this crucial question: what does the future hold for international higher education? We're delighted that Eva Egron-Pollock, Secretary General of the International Association of Universities, and Francisco Marmolejo, the lead tertiary education expert at the World Bank, agreed to accept our invitation to join in this exercise. So beginning with you, Eva, I was wondering if you and Francisco could register your reactions to that fundamental question.
Thank you, Laura. And let me start by thanking all the organizers. I'm not sure which one of these two gentlemen directors had his hand in this, but I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the honor of joining you in this celebration. After words like humble and honored and pleased, the only one I would add is very scared in front of this very illustrious audience of experts. I do want to congratulate the Center for its 20th birthday. I think that's a wonderful milestone. And I'd like to finally wish both Phil Altbach and Hans de Witt much success in the next phase of their lives. I'm sure in both cases we'll know all about it. I want to congratulate the Center on that issue, the 80th issue of its newsletter. Each short article in this newsletter is to the point, less than 1,000 words most of the time, and collectively, I think they offer a wonderful environmental scan of where higher education might be heading. What are some of the challenges it needs to meet, and many of the challenges it will face. Reading these would be a much more worthwhile time for you to spend than listening to my 5 minutes of crystal ball gazing, because they touch on just about everything. The quantitative expansion of higher education worldwide, the quality challenge that poses, the centrality of improving our effort for more equitable access to higher education while retaining quality, the imminent danger to the public mission of higher education when we see continued withdrawal from the state from funding higher education. They signal the decline of trust in the assessment methods of higher education, and thus the decline in trust of higher education credentials. IT is seen as a very, not a disruptive or destructive element, but rather as offering real potential for improvement. There's a concern written in these pieces about the place of disinterested, or if you prefer, non-instrumental learning and research in the future. And there is a general concern about the volume and often contradictory expectations and demands placed on higher education, with the potential to detract them from their mission. So what could possibly be added usefully and to such a list of issues and concerns, especially looking at international education? So, if I take as the starting point that internationalization of higher education at the institution level is now truly recognized as an integral part of what is considered a quality higher education institution, that the policy for internationalization has really moved from the margin to the center of policymaking and strategy in institutions of higher education. I suggest it has to articulate in more effective and measurable ways how it actually reinforces other major higher education agendas. If we are at the center then we must contribute to what higher education institutions are expected to deliver. Of course, academic research purposes and goals are uppermost in every institution's agenda. But we all know that there are other missions that also dictate what is expected of universities. In some respects, internationalization has very successfully connected with parts of that agenda, particularly the one on national economic competitiveness and the economic contribution that internationalization in higher education can bring. It is seen as a means to position universities and its graduates very well in the marketplace, especially globally. Being attractive internationally is a mark of excellence. International research is a must. But I would argue that internationalization also needs to take up other issues that higher education is expected to address. Inclusiveness, equity, social mobility, not only with regard to learners who gain access to international opportunities, but also in terms of the institutional and geographic partners and the scope of an institutional outreach as demonstrated by the kind of partners they choose to work with, by the type of areas they work on. Access to international opportunities cannot be simply the reserve of the few, nor only for a few universities, those that are, for example, in the top 100, top 200, even top 500. The overwhelming number of students and faculty are elsewhere. They're not in those institutions. Internationalization will also have to connect, I think, more explicitly with the agenda that is being drawn by the UN with the Sustainable Development Goals, the sons and daughters of the Millennium Development Goals. As you know, the SDGs are not only targeting developing countries, they're targeting all countries, both developed and industrialized, developing and industrialized. These agendas are the other side of the coin of the competitiveness imperative. They anchor the institution in their accountability to the wider society. They can frame the social responsibility of universities, making sure that higher education institutions are on the front line to address some of the major global challenges facing humanity, whether they are environmental, economic, cultural, social, is crucial for the credibility of higher education. Many of these challenges are interconnected and strongly linked to the persistent gaps in simply having the opportunity to have a decent life. Those gaps must be overcome, and clearly it is the purview of the higher education institutions to contribute to that. My fear is that instead of more fully integrating international education into the social responsible part of the higher education mission, we see an ever stronger pull to view internationalization as a business, a most important source of revenue, a way to stake out a presence in the market for future economic or political ties. I hope I'm wrong, but if I'm not, we, those of us in this room who are engaged in both doing international education and studying it, must remain vigilant and ready to collaborate. I certainly know that we can count on the next 20 years of CIHE, and I don't know how many years of IAU, but both of us will, I'm sure, work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Francisco, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura. I'd like to join Eva in, first of all, congratulating the center, Phil, Hans, and Laura for the many accomplishments of what we have been able to enjoy about the work that all of you have done in international higher education, and certainly with the shared hope that now under the leadership of Hans, this great set of accomplishments will be greatly multiplied. and all of us, I'm sure, are going to be extremely pleased for that. So I was able to be here precisely about 2 years ago
Yeah.
during the celebration of Phil Albach's retirement, especially in this building,
In this room,
in which
yeah.
I realized that we didn't have access to the internet. So I was unable to tweet until I realized that there is an internet connection here that allows me to do that. And so it is great to be back here and then to share with you, thanks for the invitation, some perspectives on the issue of the future of higher education and more specifically of the role of internationalization in higher education. For the ones who had suffered my presentations in the past, you may remember that I love to talk about the future of higher education, and I used to begin by quoting some well-known individuals. One of them is Albert Einstein, who used to say that who cares about the future if it will happen? So who cares about the future of international higher education? It will happen no matter what. But the other one, which is the one that I like the most, is the one that I learned by reading a very serious journal when I was a teenager, which is Reader's Digest, in which I found a quotable quote saying that when I think about the future, I'm concerned about the present. And I think if we think about the future, we should be concerned about the present, because at the end of the day, what happens with the international higher education world is going to be explained by what we do today or that what we don't do today. So the sense of urgency of doing things better is there. And for that matter, again, the research that the center has done, I think helps a lot to guide us in recognizing what is the reality first, secondly, what is doable, and then what is out of our reach. So when I read the special issue of the anniversary, I had the same impression as Eva. I said, everything is being covered here. I don't know why they are asking us to elaborate on this. This is much better presented. I think it is a wide variety of issues that, for sure, the future of higher education will face. But like Eva, I will pick up some of them, which in my opinion are much more critical. And that connects to my last point on why internationalization of higher education matters. You know, among the huge list of issues that, again, in my opinion, higher education will be facing in the future, and in fact is facing now, is, in my opinion, the most sort of challenging is the one that has to do with equitable access to higher education. And we should be very realistic in both, first of all, saying that still, we like it or not, higher education continues being extremely elitist. Still, it is just for the better off of our societies, either for economic reasons or for intellectual reasons. And that is fine, because we are part of that club. But I think we should be much more humble in saying that this is a sort of a group that needs to grow. And in fact, the demographic pressures that the world is going to be facing in future years are going to be extremely challenging for the status quo of higher education. Right now, as you see demographic trends in a good number of countries, the numbers are appealing. The wave of youth, which is going to be knocking the doors of higher education institutions, assuming that they must have a feasible dream of higher education, is going to be overwhelming, especially in some parts of the world. And in contrast, as you know, there are other regions of the world which are going to be facing exactly the opposite problem of just not having any more students that are going to be knocking the doors of those institutions. And it will be very naive for us just to see one of the two angles. We need to take a look to the two angles, because that will reshape, we like it or not, this traditional idea of what do we mean what a university is. It will have to push us to think much broader in terms of the type of students we serve, the type of students that we must serve, both traditional and non-traditional. And also, of course, it will have to reshape the way that higher education institutions operate. In fact, I believe that in a way, the traditional model of what a university is, more and more is going to be challenged. That doesn't mean that universities will disappear. I don't agree with Peter Drucker, who anticipated 20 years ago that universities will disappear. Still are there, and every single week, one university is being created in the world. But certainly the traditional idea of that university that Eva was describing as the one in the rankings, that is a model that is going to be shifting. And of course, that is going to create a significant challenge. So again, the issue of equitable access is a big one. And I already spent it by 5 minutes, or not yet? Because I have all the other 10. No, I'm just kidding. Associated with that, of course, is the whole issue related to the financing of higher education. This endless discussion about who should pay for education. As pressures continue growing on the pipeline in higher education and diminishing resources exist in the world, certainly that is going to create lots of tensions. We are seeing that right now. Carlos comes from Chile, and he can tell us a little bit about the discussions happening right now in Chile about this question of who should pay for education. And if countries can afford the welfare state idea that higher education should be free, because at the end of the day, you know that free doesn't exist. Somebody will have to pay for that. And then how much a society is willing to invest in higher education by sacrificing other sectors of the society. And I think that is very important to keep in mind, because when we see the economic analysis of the value of education, on one way we see very clearly that in today's world, the rates of return in higher education are the highest in the entire educational system, with the exception of the MENA region countries. In all the world are the highest in higher education. But on the other side, we still see that higher education continues being seen by governments as a funding model which is very regressive, in which basically in our societies, the ones who come from the better off families are the ones which are benefiting from relatively free education, while the ones who don't have to pay for higher, more expensive, and not always good quality education. And again, that is going to create, in my opinion, lots of tensions in the future, and we better deal with that, we better study that, and we better figure out a way to do that. So the last two items related to that, one has to do with technology. Eva had made a mention to that. And in technology, in this transition, as David Scott said recently, from books to MOOCs, certainly it is evident that there is a level of disruption that technology has and will have, and it has, of course, a positive and a negative angle, and I won't elaborate on that, but in my opinion, it will be extremely significant in terms of the repetition of the teaching-learning process, as well as the business model, if you want, of higher education institutions. And finally, the issue of commercialization and commoditization of higher education. I think the ones who are attending NAFSA at this point know that very well. As soon as you enter into the hall and you see, you know, the fact that there has been a significant transition of this idea of who does international higher education. Are you guys in higher education institutions or somebody else? And that whole mix of the rankings and all those kind of things around the issue of students as consumers and that about the business component of the international field in higher education is really interesting, intriguing, and concerning, I might say. So in summary, I may say that you know, challenges are there, opportunities also are there too. In fact, Eva had mentioned this assumption that we have in the field of international higher education. I remember hearing that many times and saying that many times in the years that I was directly working in international higher education, when we were attending the different circus functions of international higher education, NAFSA, AIEA, APAI, et cetera, all of us were together, the same group, going from one place to the other, and convincing ourselves that international education finally is at the center of the world, finally is at the center of higher education agendas. And let me tell you, in the 2 years that I have been relatively marginalized from that field, working in a different world in higher education, I realized that it is not. For governments, still internationalization is being seen, as by many in our higher education institutions, as more exchange of students, and quite a faculty members who love to travel, and that's something fancy that a center in the university is doing with a weird guy named Phil Altbach and stuff like that. So it has been seen as relatively marginal. So I think the big challenge we face, and I will conclude my -5 minutes that I have left, is how to really we mainstream international higher education into the agendas of higher education institutions. Still, there is too much to be done. In fact, I realize that we will achieve that goal the day that international higher education as a label disappears, because that means that really will become central to the operation and the understanding of what is the future of higher education. Paul Valéry said that what concerns me about the future is that the future no longer is what it used to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good. We began our proceedings a little late, and so we're a little over schedule at this point, but we had conceived of this particular part of the session today as an opportunity to talk a bit more and to hear from all of you. I've had a special request from someone to make a statement that's a little outside of our conversation right this moment. I'd like to go ahead and invite Julia Grinkovic from the Higher School of Economics to say that something. But then I'd like for all of us to be pondering what sort of reactions or questions or thoughts are you all having in regard to the topics that have been raised by Eva and Francisco and this general question of the future of higher education?
Dear colleagues, I know that we're behind the schedule, so I'm going to be quick. I'm very happy to be here, and the joint research projects between CIHE and HSE, High School of Economics, have been mentioned today several times, and I'm honored to have a chance today to speak on behalf of Maria Jutkevich, Vice Rector, High School of Economics, for fundamental research, and also a researcher devotedly involved in the joint research project between CIHE and HSE. So I will just read it. Happy anniversary for the Center for International Higher Education. It should probably be instead called Changing International Higher Education Center. Indeed, it's important that comparative education research helps to understand how academic systems work and what policy measures should and should not be implemented to make them work better. It is both honor and pleasure to be a part of some centers project, and we wish CIHE long years of continuous success. So congratulations on the 20th anniversary and best wishes, Maria Jutkevich. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Masha for that. We have, pardon me? Oh, we have no microphone to circulate? We had intended to have a microphone. That would be helpful. If there are some thoughts or reactions from all of you with regard to some of these issues that we've been talking about today, this future of higher education that we face looking out across a global landscape, if there are any particular issues that are on your mind, we'd be very interested to hear them. As you ponder those, I will remark that in looking over some of the articles from the anniversary issue and also thinking about what you said, this theme that has come up a lot in our writings at CIHE about expansion had talked about China and the challenge of being both big and strong. How do you expand and how do you assure quality at the same time? And I'm curious about some of your reactions to that, those notions of we have to keep growing, but as well the quality of higher education and the inclusiveness have to be there. Where are we headed in regard to that?
Your turn.
Well, we have always argued at IAU that equitable access is not in contradiction with excellence, particularly if we have a broad view of what excellence is. It may be that we really have to think about what it is that how we measure excellence. We also have to think about how we prepare and reach out to learners from different backgrounds, not necessarily disadvantaged, just different, and how we bring them in to higher education, how we prepare them, how we accompany them through the process. I think bringing together quality and equitable access means also looking at the diversification of systems and educational offers, we tend to stratify, not differentiate. Our institutionals, our higher education systems tend to be pyramidal and not, which I call stratified, rather than diversified. I think if we recognize that excellence can be found in just about any institution of higher education linked to its own mission, I think we can do a much, much better job of broadening access and at the same time retaining excellence. There was a presentation, I think, at NAFSA a day ago, 2 days ago, that actually said you can have one or the other, but you cannot have both. And I think we have to fight that perception, because I think it is wrong. It doesn't necessarily, it cannot necessarily happen in the system and in the trajectory we're on right now. But I think if we recognize a variety of ways to be excellent and accompany learners who come less prepared, I think we have a huge opportunity.
Just briefly, we'll add to what Eva had said, that I think this is one of the areas in which, unfortunately, in higher education, we tend to be relatively isolationist in saying, okay, is, you know, the problem of the ones who cannot come to my place is not my problem, is others' problem. So I basically am doing whatever I can do with whatever I have here. And I think, and we see that in the most equitable systems in education in the world are the ones in which you find equity in the entire educational system. So of course, if you begin with huge stratification at the initial stages, that will continue being prolonged in such a way that at the end of the pipeline, it is unavoidable that the ones which are making the race are the ones which already, for whatever reasons, were able to go through and left out many more. So I think when we talk about equitable access under the assumption of shared quality, we need to recognize that we in higher education have an important responsibility to play, not only with the ones which are there, but also making sure that we better connect with the previous levels of education in order to make sure that the basis is going to be much broader than what it exists right now. And that also leads to the issue of institutional diversification. I believe it is very important that in countries exist enough diversification of institutions, with the assumption that quality should be in all of them, not only in the ones which are benefited because are the ones that want to be in the rankings or that the government have decided that will have to go into the rankings. Because at the end, that leads us to the problem of the proxy that is very commonly used for quality. So the proxy right now, it is, as you know very well, professors with a PhD and research publications and a number of issues which certainly are important, but that can be challenged.
Yes, Liz Riesberg.
You? Okay, that's fine. That's very common to the World Bank, so I would be delighted. Let me prepare my speech. No, I think, for-profit higher education, we like it or not, is here to stay. And due to the two reasons. One of them that has to do with the main rationale. The growth has been going precisely in countries where, for whatever reasons, either the government relinquished its responsibility to provide access to larger number of individuals, or it's just incapable of doing that. So as far as that continues, which I think, being realistic, will happen to be the case, I think there is going to be room for entrepreneurs who want to venture into the higher education activity. Being said that, and that is the position that we have, and I say that because I strongly insist on that in my day-to-day work. Being said that, that's why I believe personally, that huge emphasis should be placed in very strong quality assurance systems. Because if you have a strong quality, you will have to submit to those standards, and if you are providing a service, and the service has a value for the individuals which are willing to have that opportunity, why not? The problem is when you have cases in many countries in which there has been a huge proliferation of the for-profit sector of higher education with extremely weak quality assurance or quality control systems. And of course, that provides room for bad quality both in the for-profit, the private, the public, and all the higher education institutions. And that in general is a disservice who are going into higher education. But I think if emphasis is placed in a sort of fair play, strongly enforced, properly established, I won't say quality assurance culture, but quality enhancement culture, I think if there is room for that, why not? That's my opinion. And
If you could be really quick, we need to complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say I wanted to say two things. One is that the experts are in this room. This is not a Q&A of Francisco and I, because we don't have all the answers. Some of those answers are with you. But what I was going to say is that both Francisco and I experienced a national system where the quality control, and it was both quality assurance but also quality control, was much stronger when applied to the private sector than to the public sector. And that also exists in countries where the public sector is expected to be fine just because it's public, but it's the private sector that is scrutinized much more. So there is that as well that I think needs to be considered. And the final, but I completely agree that it's the only way to safeguard is to have quality assurance and quality enhancement throughout the system. But the other thing I was going to say is that it is getting increasingly difficult to distinguish public and private in higher education. The blurring is going to get worse and worse between institutions that have a mixed revenue bag, and we're going to have to find new ways of describing institutions that do receive, this is still not the case in many countries in Europe, but in the rest of the world, institutions have multiple sources of funding. The profit motive is something else, but public-private will become almost impossible to distinguish in the years to come, I think.
Very sadly, we are out of time and in fact have passed time. But luckily for us, we have a reception in which we can continue these conversations. We also have hopefully another 20 years of this kind of analysis and discussion that we'll all be involved in. Please join me in thanking Eva and Francisco for their contributions today.
pleasure. Thank you, Eva. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, very good.
We also wanted to just say one more word of thanks from Dr. Altbach.
Who are these for? Ladies and gentlemen, before we get up to eat, if you don't mind, I would like to thank several more people. One of them is Laura.
Thank you very much.
For being the organizational genius behind this particular event, and many others. And Georgiana also, who is organizing as we speak. I want to thank you all for coming. But first, I want to make a couple comments based on our really good speakers, because I can't resist. And I'll be so brief. I agree with what's been said, but Eva is right that we can have quality at the different levels, and we certainly need differentiated academic systems. But if the state continues not to provide appropriate funding, that doesn't mean funding for research universities for everybody, but if the state doesn't provide money, it isn't going to work. And we're going to have what we've seen around the world, which is a continuing decline of quality at the bottom of mass systems. So to me, all of this discussion about, yes, we can do it, yes, we can do it, but it does require the state. We can't leave them out. So nobody would disagree with that. The other point is the universities, the research universities that are ranked, that are part of the rankings, that aspire to be in the rankings, more power to them. Those universities are required in a global knowledge economy. They shouldn't be the whole system. And the systems, as you guys have both said, need to be differentiated so that institutions which are doing teaching, mass teaching, and so on, are appropriately recognized for what they do, and they don't compete at a level that they shouldn't be competing at and cannot afford, nor can the government afford. So, but I think the rankings are with us, for better or for worse, and I can see some actually good arguments for having them because they do help with this differentiation, but not to be obsessed by them. So those are just two comments as I give up power and welcome Hans de Witt, and thank you tremendously for coming to this event.